So today we consider the concept of relationship as experienced in our families, particularly the parent-child relationship. And I'm talking about parent here as a role, parent as a caretaker, for a child, or as a mentor, or a teacher, or a coach. Biological connection is common but not required for parenthood. The relationship that we develop with our parents or our caretakers defines us in critical ways. It's so important that the relationship between child and parent should be one of our biggest focuses and concerns as a culture. But most of us never take a class on how to be a parent. Did any of you ever take a class on? Oh, okay. We did one here. Of course we did. Well, ordinarily, okay, in the real world, it's unusual. I mean, maybe there's sex ed classes in some schools, although often surrounded by a lot of controversy. But it's rare for people to receive skill training on how to be a loving and effective parent. Basic parenting skills are useful, in my opinion, for everyone, even for those who don't ever plan to become parents. Children are also raised and shaped by the community, so we all have a role to play in this vital area. How do we raise a child? How do we mentor anyone, for that matter, to be a master of their own dreams? What parenting skills or mentoring skills are needed so that a child can experience life in loving, fulfilling, and appreciative ways? A lack of parental training can have tragic results, and it has, throughout human history, particularly for kids who can't live up to their parents' expectations. And particularly when parents react to difficult or different children with abusive or violent behavior. Too often, historically, when a child is not what a parent expects, or when a child does not honor their parents' wishes, they can actually be rejected by their parents. Have you ever seen that happen? Kicking kids out of the house, kicking kids out of the family is not a new thing. I grew up in a small town not far from here. My family frequently took in teens who had been kicked out. I got to see this up close. I got to see what happens when parents reject their own children, something I was fortunate enough to avoid. But I got to experience it through those who slept on our couches and on our floors. Later in life, when I was doing work with homeless people in Lansing, I found that many of the homeless teens at that time were either gay or transgender, like maybe half of them. Some parents would draw a line in the sand telling their child to stop being gay or get out. What happens next? Usually something terrible. When a rejected child deeply loves their parents and family, the rejection they feel is that much more tragic. Sometimes a teen will try to suppress their orientation to hide it from their parents, which creates more psychological damage. Many of you have seen this too, have known people who could not accept their own LGBT kids or family members. Some parents have been taught their whole lives that homosexuality is a sin, a one-way ticket to damnation. If a child refuses or is unable to change their ways to stop being gay, parents can interpret that as disobedience, as a failure to honor and obey them as parents, on top of committing the sin of their sexual orientation. Now, we know today that changing a person's sexual orientation is not always possible. That someone can't stop being gay just because their parents or their friends or their family demand it. And not just teens, sometimes these conflicts have lifelong implications. I've met trans adults who've not talked to a family member in 30, 40 years because of this old stigma. And it's not just LGBT kids either. Have you ever met a girl who was kicked out of the family because she was pregnant? or because she had an abortion. Raising kids teaches us our limits, and in many ways, when those limits are crossed, abuse and rejection are too often the strategies parents use because many of us just don't know any better. Because we don't have the basic skills to know the difference between parenting and coercion, or because we have some perverse sense of tough love. Fortunately, these extreme situations are becoming less common. Most families bend rather than break, compromise rather than reject. Despite the fact that Deuteronomy 21:18 suggests that a rebellious child should be stoned to death, or the passage we read this morning from the Ten Commandments, the command to honor thy mother and father. But what about in the New Testament? What example did Jesus provide in regard to family? What did Jesus say about raising children? Well, we can't fully answer that question because Jesus never had children of his own. And given the importance of raising children, it's notable that Jesus did not walk that path while he was on earth. And this is unusual. This is unexpected. I mean, we're used to it. We grew up with it. But it's counter to the law of Moses. Jewish rabbis and teachers from ancient times would not skip marriage, would certainly have a family because the law of Moses demands that. Be fruitful and multiply, it says. Yet Jesus himself deviated significantly from the traditional family model. Jesus, as an adult, never formed a traditional family. Instead, Jesus formed a chosen family of hand-selected individuals. In the gospel, we mostly hear about the men, the 12 men that made up Jesus' core family, as he indicated in the scripture today. He saw it that way. And then we know there were women there too, even if the gospels don't always honor that, women like Mary and Martha of Bethany, for instance. And at least in one case, Jesus seems to show more honor to his disciples than his own mother, as we just saw. I mean, in today's scripture reading, we find Jesus teaching his disciples. His mom shows up, his stepbrothers. They want to see him. And then Jesus seems to dishonor them by saying his disciples were his family now. Whoever does the will of God, that's my family. Almost sounds like a contradiction to the commandment to honor one's father and mother, as laid out by Moses. But I don't think that's what Jesus was up to. When we look at the scripture in context, we see that after Jesus makes this teachings, a statement about his disciples, he leaves the building. And who's outside the building? His mother, his stepbrothers. Going outside, Jesus would have connected with his mother and his brothers. So he wasn't necessarily rejecting them. To me, Jesus was just using the opportunity of their presence to make a point in his teaching. Jesus was expanding the idea of family beyond nuclear family, beyond biological family boundaries, to include all those who follows God's plan, which is love. Jesus is pointing to a level of inclusive love that transcends our ideas about family. As an adult, Jesus, through his words and actions, redefined family in a more inclusive way, opening his family up to anyone willing to walk the path of love. Family relationships define us, but we don't always end up with parents who are ready to be parents, or parents who are prepared to deal with the challenges we bring. While there are few gifts in life as precious as a loving family, not everyone has that experience. So what does it take? What makes someone a good parent? I mean, balance, of course, lots of love. I mean, tons of patience, right? But what is it? What's actually vital for us to teach our children? I mean, beyond just teaching our children to follow Jesus, I mean, what does that mean exactly when you're raising a child? How does that break down into a skill set that can be taught? And if we can do that, if we can identify the skills that our children need that we need to be? How do we mentor and support a child's spiritual needs and their spiritual development? I mean, do we even know what spiritual needs are? You ever think about that? Are my spiritual needs being met? Are my child's spiritual needs being met? They're not listed in the Bible, at least not directly. And while my guess is there are many spiritual needs, I feel that most can be organized into maybe 4 or 5 general categories or spiritual need areas. To me, these spiritual needs are really helpful to know because they give us a roadmap to use when raising children, when mentoring somebody, or when evaluating ourselves. Why am I not happy? What spiritual needs of mine are not being met? And those spiritual needs, which we all have, include things, in my mind, the acceptance and belonging, a sense of right and wrong, a capacity for awe and wonder, and a direction or purpose in life. Okay, I went through those kind of quick, I know. So let me go through these one by one. And maybe along the way, you may think of some others as well. The first spiritual need on my list is acceptance and belonging. Acceptance and belonging are first on my list because as an inclusive church, this is a spiritual need that we often focus on. We don't have to accept everything a child does, but we do want our children to know that our love for them transcends their actions and their challenges. That like God's love, our parental love is deep and abiding, and our connection is lifelong. This is one of the first spiritual needs we ideally address with our children, and that we need to learn ourselves. It's a lesson that goes a long ways towards ending the practice of throwing a child away when their true colors don't match our expectations. To teach our children that they are accepted and belong in the family, in the church, in the community, no matter what, with some reasonable limits, of course, for certain harmful behaviors such as abuse and violence. But other than that, and then the second lesson for me, as far as what we need to teach our children, is about right and wrong. This lesson is easier when a child is young, but it gets much more challenging when we encounter the teen years. The simple lessons of safety, like don't touch fire, don't touch the stove, they don't work well on teenage kids. Teenagers need to understand principles more so than just rules. They need to understand the reasons behind the rules so they can bend, they can find their way around them. Right or wrong for older children includes a sense of individual and social justice. That's included in teaching children about right and wrong. Social justice. And appropriate responses when they encounter injustice. Like sometimes it's not okay to break the rules. But sometimes it's the right thing to do. Martin Luther King Jr. was taught certain rules as a young child. He had a strict upbringing. Never play on the street, Martin, never. And stay out of trouble. Well, as he matured, justice demonstrated action in the streets. And as the late congressman and civil rights activist John Lewis would later say, it required good trouble. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. had a keen sense of right and wrong, and that sense of justice propelled him into a prophetic role. We also have to learn how to deal, though, with these injustices that we see around us and we can't address. You see, the more perceptive we get on our spiritual journeys, the more we walk the pathway of love, the more we start to recognize the massive injustices that are going on around us in every moment. And we have a spiritual need to remain emotionally healthy in the face of massive injustice, particularly those injustices that we're powerless to address, those injustices that God has not called us, that are not part of our mission. Another spiritual need we need to be teaching our kids, or maybe ourselves, is the ability or the capacity to appreciate the wonder of life. I talk about this on a regular basis because it's so important. Children who lack a sense of awe and wonder will also lack spiritual depth and easily become cynical. Life is amazing beyond explanation, and providing that perspective is a vital parental priority, mentor priority, teacher priority. Yet of all the spiritual needs, this is the one that's most often overlooked. This is the one that's most often underappreciated, with devastating results in our culture. A priority that's too often overlooked even by the best parents often overlook that. And how do we tell if we have a problem here? If we don't wake up every morning thankful to be alive, in awe of the gift of life, we got work to do on this spiritual need in our own life. We have work to do to instill awe and wonder for every person that we mentor or teach or raise. Finally, the fourth important spiritual need is direction or purpose. Once a child feels that they belong or are accepted, once they have a sense of values and a sense of awe, they still need to find their purpose in life. Without a sense of purpose, a person can wander through life and feel adrift, even if they feel like they belong and are accepted. Installing a sense of direction in a child so that a child can safely ponder, why am I alive? Why did God create me? What is my purpose? I mean, we often, we ask little kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? That's along these lines. But I don't know that that's the best or the only question we need to ask. I think it's more important to establish an understanding that all people have a reason to be alive. And then the challenge is to figure out your purpose and also to recognize that it's going to change through the years. Okay, so you want to be a police officer. Great. Why is that? Oh, you want to be a teacher? Why? What's underneath that? What's driving that? Or doctor? Essentially, this is about providing a child with discernment tools so they can experience life as a discovery process. So that children can see their lives as a quest for meaning and as a service to others and be in awe of that. If a child lacks the experience, if they lack the ability to experience awe and wonder, no direction or purpose is going to be enough. Is going to be fulfilling. So these needs are also linked and connected. If someone has no sense of purpose, why am I? There's no reason I'm alive. No sense of awe and wonder. They don't feel like they belong anywhere. What happens? The bottom line is to give kids the tools they need in order to discover and to rediscover their purpose as it changes, and to be in awe of that process. Of course, there's other needs that I didn't mention. This is just kind of intended to get us started. To be the best parent, the best mentor, the best teacher, the best coach that we can be as followers of Christ. Taking on the role of parent or mentor is about working to discover a child's true colors, what fits them, what God intended for them. Raising children is not about making clones of ourselves. It's about creating and supporting new life. Ideally, the parent-child relationships in our life will grow and flourish in loving ways throughout our life. We've all been children. Do you remember? And most of us, many of us, maybe all of us, most of us certainly, take on a parental or a mental role ourselves at some point in our lives. Maybe that's going to look like what our parents have done for us. Or maybe it'll be what we wish our parents had been able to do for us. Or maybe, like Jesus, we won't have children ourselves at all, but we will surround ourselves with others who we will help lift up as an expression of love. In the Bible, humans are referred to as children of God. So when considering the parent-child relationship and all its intricacies and wonders, maybe we're getting an awesome glimpse of God's nature in the process.